Soundside Church, Pastor Aaron coming to you and to your community group in particular. Welcome to our new series, our new community group series that we're calling Credo, Our Spoken Faith. Credo. That's an interesting word, isn't it? And maybe you've heard it before, but the word credo or credo is just a Latin word that means I believe. When we say credo, it's saying I believe. And you know, belief it's our faith. And so we're talking about our spoken faith. And the reason we're doing that is because a lot of people talk about faith, but it's what our faith consists of that is its essence. Faith has to have content. What do you believe? Or more specifically, what do we as Christians believe? And so credo, our spoken faith. It's not just I believe, we're going to talk about what we believe. And in order to do that, we're going to use a creed. And of course, creed and credo are certainly related. And a creed is just simply a statement of belief. And we're going to use this in our church. We intend to introduce the idea of a creed, a statement of what we believe. The good thing about a creed is it takes all of this stuff that we believe and boils it down to an extremely concise, simple statement that can not only be learned very easily, but memorized and then shared with others. In the book of Jude said he intended to write to the church about the faith that was once for all delivered unto the saints. And the important thing about our faith is that it has been delivered to us, and we need to be able to deliver it to others, whether the people around us or our children or the next generation. We are responsible for passing the faith along, and a creed is extremely helpful for doing that because it puts it all into one place. Now, the truth is the church has been using creeds ever since the very beginning. In fact, as the New Testament was being developed, there was a kernel of truth or a center of truth that was being absorbed by believers. And as the apostles were writing their truth, it contributed to this body of belief that then the churches were able to use that body of belief to see, well, what writings are in fact scriptural. A lot of people think that creeds come from councils and official statements. And the truth is that a lot of them do. There have been many creeds and confessions written throughout the history of the church. One of the most famous ones came in the early 300s in the town of Nicaea. The emperor had convened a council of bishops to address a very important question about the divinity of Jesus Christ. Most of the church believed Jesus was divine, but a certain teacher by the name of Arius said he wasn't. And so the emperor pulled the bishops together. And as they evaluated what the Bible taught and what the apostles had preached, they came up with a creed called the Nicene Creed. But here's the amazing thing about the Nicene Creed that the council chose to adopt. They didn't actually have to write a new creed, because when they had all gathered together, there was a creed already being used. You see, in the first couple hundred years of the church's existence, there was a small creed, just a kernel of truth, that body of faith that had been assembled and was being confessed by various churches in all parts of the empire. Now, you might go to a different church and their creed might differ ever so slightly in the wording, but it was the same basic statement of faith. And what's amazing is that many of these churches had no connection with each other. And yet, if you went to different ones, they were all confessing the same thing. You say, well, how did that work? Because they all got it from the same place. Jesus, through his apostles, through their writings. And we discovered that the church everywhere was confessing the same basic faith. So that when the Nicene Council came together, they simply took the confession that was already being used and they modified it ever so slightly to address the particular question they were asking. They gave us the Nicene Creed, but what they used as their model is what we today call the Apostles' Creed. Wasn't written by the apostles, not specifically, but it is an accurate representation of their teaching, which they received from Jesus Christ. The Apostles' Creed was used when a person came to faith before they were baptized. The Apostles' Creed was used as a framework to teach these brand new believers what the Christian faith was before they confessed it through baptism. And of course, they would confess it, be baptized, and then they would receive communion with the body of believers. And so this is the earliest creed that we know of. Many creeds are used by different branches of the Christian church, but this was the earliest creed we know of that was being used by the whole church. I find it interesting that today, when everybody has their own tailor-made faith, everybody's doing their own thing, to confess an ancient creed is in fact countercultural. And it's not just countercultural, it's also multicultural, because we're confessing a creed that has been used by Christians in all centuries, in all places, of all ages, at all times, and all cultures. It binds us together. And when we say, I believe, and confess the Apostles' Creed together, we are taking our place in a great community of faith that stretches back to the apostles of Jesus Christ and to his teachings that came from him. And so that's what we confess when we confess the Apostles' Creed. That's what we're going to be looking at this fall. As we look at the Apostles' Creed this fall, my role in each of these videos and each of these evenings is simply going to be to kind of introduce us to a particular segment of the Creed. My goal and hope is that your community group will be able to learn the Creed together and to be able to recite it together as we learn to recite it together as a church. Now, many of you, of course, are coming from maybe a more formally structured type church, and maybe you already know the Apostles' Creed because you've confessed it many times in your own past. Many of you, however, are coming from a less formal, less structured church, and the Apostles' Creed might be new to you, although the elements in it aren't. Well, if you're familiar with it, I hope that this series will help you learn a little bit more about it. And if you're brand new to it, I hope that this will give you something that you can use to strengthen your own faith and communicate it to others. And we begin with the first line of the Apostles' Creed. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. So let me introduce the idea here. First of all, the Creed sets us apart from those who believe in no God. I believe in God. Well, Christians believe in God, not no God. But we also believe in one God. I believe in God, in not many gods. I don't believe in the gods, plural. I believe in God. Christianity is monotheistic. However, as we'll see later on in the Creed, we're not just monotheistic. We believe in one God who eternally exists in three persons. And the first person of the Godhead is God the Father. I believe in God the Father. Now, we could really debate about what it means for God to be a father, and let's go ahead and admit that there are a few places in the scripture that God says, I care for you like a mother. Nevertheless, it was Jesus, his son, who taught us to pray, Our Father. Of course, God is a spirit. He does not have a body like ours, and so the gender specifics of humanity should not be imputed to God. Nevertheless, God revealed himself to us as a father, and we are taught to address him as such. There is the fatherhood of God, but the essence of that term is the relationship that we can have to him through Jesus Christ, his Son. And through Jesus Christ, his Son, we can be God's adopted sons and daughters. I believe in God the Father Almighty. What a wonderful term, Almighty. It refers to God's omnipotence. Now, as we discuss omnipotence and what it means, I'm just going to go ahead and swat away one of the objections. People are always like, well, could God make a rock too big he can't move it? Can God make a triangle with four sides? The truth is nonsense, whether or not you stick "can God" in front of it. God can do anything. The only limitations are his own nature and his own will. Finally, I believe in God the Father, Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. This stresses that God is the creator of all things. Now, We believe God is the creator. The Bible teaches creation. But one thing I want us to try to avoid is any unnecessary debates about how God created. In recent years, and by recent I mean the last 100 or so, there has been a strong movement in the Christian church to press for a more literal reading of the creation parts of our Bible, Genesis chapter 1 and 2 and so on. And there are many smart, intelligent, godly, holy Christians who believe that God created everything in 6 literal 24-hour days. However, there are also many smart, godly Christians who believe that the creation accounts are more poetic and shouldn't be read necessarily that literally. And the truth is, within the church, there is room for disagreement on this, as long as we agree that God himself created all things out of nothing. Now, the point is, in the original text of the Bible, that the Bible isn't giving us a description so much of the how as of the who. I hold here a collection of creation myths and creation accounts that the original audience of the Bible would have been familiar with. Babylonian creation myths, Canaanite creation myths. And the truth is that when God inspired Moses to write the words of creation, God was giving his people a completely different account of the origins of the universe. And the point was that it was God, the only God, who created all things. He himself was not part of the creation. He's distinct from it, which is why we say the maker of heaven and earth, because heaven and earth not only come from Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Heaven and earth was a figure of speech that refers to everything. In the beginning, God created everything. God himself being the only being not created. God is not a part of his creation. God is not limited to the creation. God is distinct from his creation, outside of his creation, although intimately involved with his creation, which involves you and me. With that as a preface, I'm going to invite you to follow your community group leader's lead and look at the discussion questions as we evaluate this first line of the Apostles' Creed and where we get these truths from in our Bibles. And I hope that this is a time of learning, of growth, and encouragement as we confess our faith.